Here we go. So just want to make sure I don't miss anything here. We have our panelists. I'm going to start with Chris Whong. Chris Whong is the founder and director of New York City Planning Labs, a division of the New York City Department of City Planning that embraces open technology to create tools and help New Yorkers better understand the built environment. Chris is a leader in the New York City civic technology community and a former Code for America brigade leader. We have Sarah Williams, an associate professor of technology and urban planning at MIT, where she also directs the Civic Data Design Labs. The lab works with data, maps, and mobile technologies to expose urban policy issues and respond to the needs and interests of citizens traditionally on the margins of policy development. We have Noel Hidalgo, who is the executive director of BetaNYC, an organization that strives to demystify open data, which we need, advocate for transparency laws, and support the city's thriving civic technology ecosystem. BetaNYC runs an innovation lab and fellows program in partnership with the Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer and curates the New York City School of Data Conference. And lastly, we have Jay Wu, who comes to us from Rice University's Kinder Institute for Urban Research in Houston, where she leads Houston's Community Data Connection. The program is aimed to facilitate the practical use of data by city and community leaders for decision-making and capacity building in Houston's disadvantaged communities. Awesome. So that's a little bit about our panelists, and I'm gonna start out. Come join you guys over here. And like I said, ask questions, and I'll keep an eye out. I'll keep an eye out for questions as we go. But we'll start with something simple, which is a little bit about what you guys know about the history or your experience with the history of open data, how you first got involved, or things you know about, but the connection with how this all got kicked off. I know I mentioned what happened in New York, but there's sort of a larger ecosystem out there. So I don't know, anyone who wants to take it away to start. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name's Noel and Noel. I find one of the New York City phenomenal. I'm a migrant here to New York. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, then bounced around the East Coast before getting here. And once I started to peer into understanding the progressive history of New York City government, discovered that there was some pre-existing charter revisions that created this thing called COPIC, which was the Commission on Public Information and Information. And though it sits underneath the public advocate and has very rarely met, when it first did meet, it created this thing called the data catalog, which is a phone book. So you can go down to DCAST, and you can get this from 1993 phone book that teaches you how to file a Freedom of Information Act.
This is a physical
book. Right? And then you can flip through agency by agency, data set by data set. And one thing that really blew my mind is that New York City's government has been so forward thinking over such a long time period, trying to put information into people's hands, that it almost got forgotten up until this recent turn of events that led to the creation of the city's open data law. And it's amazing that we're so fortunate to be in a city that has such a broad ecosystem of advocates for public information, that we can continue to have this really rich ecosystem here in New York, which is unprecedented in the United States.
Thanks. Other comments on people's experience getting involved or the history there?
So I can talk a little bit about
Jay?
Houston. So Houston passed its open data policy in 2014. I think New York City was 2012, but it's still a fairly new concept in Houston. Since 2005, 2006-ish, the city has been working on data quality issues, data documentation issues within the city, but not much of an effort to release the information to the public. So in 2014, they were looking for an enterprise data officer to coordinate within the city, because we have 22 city departments. So coordinating with all the departments to gather all the information and to make all the data documentation and data formats consistent and push it out to the community to use. And also, it's about the same time, I think almost 3 years ago, we applied for funding through a local philanthropic foundation, just because we're a university and we think we have something to share with the community, to do something to contribute to this data effort. So at the Kinder Institute, we have a data initiative called Urban Data Platform. So just to help the city to understand better open data policy, better practices, just share some knowledge with them, and also downloading some data from through the open data portal and make it better, do some research and data cleaning, aggregate it to a certain level that's shareable to the general public. So that's our contribution.
I think, I remember I came to New York in 2011 to study urban planning, but I studied GIS in the undergrad. In 2003, I was graduating from the University of Maryland and had studied GIS there, and data was this magical thing that just lived on the K drive, right? So you go through your GIS curriculum and you go through all the step-by-step tutorials, and it would just be start with data, go to the K drive and get this data set. And it was I remember it always just being there's this magical source of data. Somebody probably received it from agencies on a CD and had to order it. But that whole step was just totally
and sometimes in academic environments, things are served to you beautifully. You don't have to worry about dirty data, cleaning, where you get it, right? You just start with this beautiful,
so,
which is not the world we live in.
So, never really did much work professionally with GIS. When I came back to school, found myself sitting in front of GIS again. And actually was shocked that it hadn't changed much in 10 years, which is another story. And then on top of that, was just blown away that this whole data movement was kicking off in New York City, and there was just tons of stuff that you could just download off the internet. It was just crazy. So I just remember the excitement building, and then just stark contrast from 10 years earlier. It was just so different.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned this K drive because I'm.
Oh, sorry. What was GIS the acronym? Oh, sorry. GIS stands for?
Geographic Information Systems or Geographic Information Sciences, depending on who you ask.
Which is basically software used to map things, to be able to study a map, to join a map and do a bunch of things. So sorry about that. We'll keep an eye out for tech jargon. Sorry, I didn't.
Oh yeah, I was just, I didn't hear your question. Sorry, I interrupted you. I just didn't hear it up here. But Ben flagged it. Awesome. But I was just thinking, I was the one academic who made those K drives, and now, and what's really awesome is I actually don't have to make those drives anymore. We still have we actually call it the X drive at MIT. It's full of data that I've collected over the years, but now mostly students want to access it from the open data portals, and they find the K drive to be kind of esoteric. But I did want to also think about the history of open data, because I'm actually putting together a book about that. And if you really think about it, open data goes back to 1993, where Bill Clinton actually put together an act that said all geographic data had to be, by the federal government, had to be opened up and had to have a metadata standard to go with it. And the reason I want to talk about that is because data is really political, and after 9/11 and other kinds of major events, we were kind of closed down our data, shut it down, constrained it, and I think it's really important to remember that this is our data. It's public. It's for us to use, and we need to ensure that it keeps being open. So while we have great open data laws right now in New York, we need to make sure those laws are in existence, but also to remember that open data costs money, and we need to support that through the government. And so a lot of the reasons that the work of Clinton didn't kind of pass through a long time was both funding, limitations, political will, and so forth. And really, Obama allowed that political will to really manifest by putting in place a number of different incentives for cities to have open data, and I think we really need to think about how do we keep those in place over time.
And I think, so you made the statement, data is political, right? Which I think everyone up here knows what she's saying. Maybe less so people who haven't worked with it. I mean, can we talk a little bit about what that means and reasons and your experiences with the politics of data? I mean, you brought up like the 9/11 example. Immediately, I'm assuming there was sort of a security aspect, which is, hey, if we have data on all of our buildings' plans, and can people use them against us, or or if they know every time a plane takes off, so we have all this data. So there's one example, security, but I think anyone who's worked with government data has run into other political barriers outside of the security space. And have you guys, and what's been your experience there?
Yeah, there's been a fascinating ongoing conversation about how, so the city now has a chief privacy officer who's sit in place to protect our information, us as residents, as citizens, as well as to ensure that the city's ecosystem is secure and is held up to proper standards, so that way we don't get bricked. In other words, all of our computers become unusable by a hacker. And kind of like whittled throughout all of that conversation is a story that the NYPD had for many years refused to allow the publishing of subway entrances and exits. And I don't know if you've been to
You mean
New
the
York
location?
The location.
All right, so like in other words, a data set which would tell you the longitude and latitude of every entrance to a subway and every exit of a subway. Go ahead.
And so I don't know if you've been to New York City, but you know the
I'm
subway entrances.
pretty sure they've all been to New York City.
Yeah, all the subway entrances are pretty accessible and they're pretty clearly delineated by a nice big globe. And the NYPD's argument was, well, if terrorists, we didn't want to hand information to terrorist hands, so that way they could bomb our subway system. And that's kind of a ridiculous argument because that's already information that's in the public hand. And when we start thinking about like where this creates an issue is that now all of a sudden people who are looking for accessible entrances wouldn't have that information in their hands. And so what a fight that was created was around the fact that we needed public information around subway entrances so people who have accessibility issues know which entrance to use, which is the quickest way to get there. And that issue around accessibility also moves to our financial data and our property data. And so for years and years and years, our city's property tax record, ACRIS, and Pluto, which is the land shape data, you would have to pay thousands of dollars to get to those data sets. And Local Law 11 was designed to give access to everyone, because really the people who had access to that information were the real estate developers and the people who had financial capital who could then buy that data, put it into their data systems, and then be able to profit off of it. And community activists wouldn't have the most latest and greatest version of that particular data. So those are some of the political issues that we've had to come across. And over the last 4 years, we've also been able, BetaNYC and a group of other community advocates have been working to make sure that the user data, the data that's up on the city's open data portal, is accessible to as many people as possible. So we've worked with 311 to make sure that the data has all of these different columns. So if you're a community board member, you can go to the data portal, you can find your community board, and you can download all of that data and do your own types of research around it. And we've been working with the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics to help grow these things called data dictionaries. And we now have a new law that's on the books that says every single data set should have a data dictionary. So not only can you get access to the data, but you can also know what's inside of the data.
Right. On the political front, I know Chris has had an interesting perspective because he was kind of, I met him because of his advocacy in some of the open data work, and now works within the city, within the Department of City Planning. So he's a valuable asset to the panel. And my experience was him filing a Freedom of Information request to get taxi data, which had been only accessible to those who I guess you had to file a form, you had to go down, you had to bring a hard drive, right? And they said it had to be sealed. This is how data was transferred. This is not that long ago, right?
Yeah, ironically, actually, it was a class at the end of grad school. It was supposed to be about open data, and I actually knew that the data that they were presenting on was not open. It was actually a bunch of researchers at CUSP, and they were like, look at all this stuff we learned from taxi data, and I was like, well, that's not actually open data. And then it just sort of came up on Twitter, and then we just messaged them. I messaged them, and they were, they said, if you fill out a FOIL form, you can get this data. So I did, and like any good civic hacker, I put it on the internet immediately.
Which caused a bit of a stir. And
yeah.
what we've seen, and I don't know if there's a pattern you guys have noticed, that one of the surest ways to get government to release data to the public is to do it for them. And then the cat's out of the bag, and then they release it because they want control over it, right? Once you're going around them and releasing your own copy of it, they tend to say, all right, well, I guess we're releasing. I think it wasn't long, what is it, a year after that, right?
I think there was some issues with the, anonymization. They tried to anonymize the data, and they didn't use a
good algorithm.
The algorithm they did it with made it so that it was effectively not anonymous. But there's also other questions about whether it should have been to begin with anyway, because they publish full lists of drivers' names and when they're licensed and that sort of thing. So there was some debate over that, but I think it was just one of those things. It's like a no-brainer. The excuse that it's too big to publish was definitely not one, because I published it.
Right.
And like it's just there's just every reason in the world why people come up with it, like, oh, no one would be interested in this, or it's too big, or it's too complex, or whatever.
And sometimes, so we have this civic tech community, which I know many, which in some part people are all part of here, and often they are coming in and taking something that maybe isn't a PDF form. I mean, the NYPD would put out this 500-page PDF with one table in it, you know, and so you'd have to write so there's a lot of that going on, and I think I've seen over and over and over again that the dedication of well, we'll fix that for you. Then suddenly, oh, we was open all the time. We're seeing a lot of that across the board.
So I will chime in to talk a little bit about the political issues in another direction. It's like data analysis really requires a lot of collaboration between government agencies and the departments. So the ideal world would you have a centralized data lake. You know, all the information is kind of connected, for example, like housing issues. If you really want to solve some affordable housing issues, you need to collect the data, say, from the appraisal district with housing authority, affordable housing units, where they are, how the housing choice voucher were used, that information. And then with the finance department, all the fundings going into that program, how that's disseminated. You know, so all these things are kind of connected. So that requires a lot of collaboration between departments to do that. But sometimes, you know, as I said, Houston has 22 departments, and just sharing the data, they're willing to share the data with, say, the enterprise data officer. Okay, but you know, it requires also data stewardship, understanding the data, and then make it usable, you know, for others. So that's another political issue to solve.
And Mayor de Blasio, if you're listening, you haven't had a chief analytics officer for over a year, so we haven't had that type of leadership in New York City, and it definitely reflects on the future opportunities that exist. A few years ago here in New York, we got a piece of legislation passed that's talking about algorithms. And I'm sure if you've played around on Facebook, you know that algorithms can be a dangerous thing. They can also be very good, but now when government has these algorithms that are being used for decision making, what's the leadership and where is the leadership to make sure that those algorithms are as accountable as the humans that are programming them or the humans that are being hired? And so you're very fortunate to have that type of leadership, and I wish New York City would get that leadership back.
But I think you make a really good point about the politics not just being outwardly facing, like how do we get open data out to the public? They can be really internal, right? Like how do we get the police department to give data to the emergency management systems? They don't share data. It's amazing, right? They're both trying to keep the public safe, but they have lots of political reasons that they don't want to share it. And I think one thing that, as I've been doing work for this book, is I find cities say that they have an open data policy, but when it comes to their own departments, there is no open data policy on some of the really important kinds of things that and analysts that they can do, right, to make our cities better for housing, better safety, lots of different areas. And I think work needs to be done in that. One of the most common reasons that they cite is they spend years creating a memorandum of understandings between two departments. I heard one.
You see, Chris is chuckling over here because he works at the Department of City Planning, so he's got a smirk.
He definitely understands, right? So how do we solve even the open data needs within the city is the question I want to throw out there.
What's your take, Chris?
I mean, I think the problem is that, you know, the open data, what we are exposed to sort of in the public world becomes one little layer of the actual data economy that's happening inside of government. And so, you know, case in point, without naming names, is that there's a very critical data set that my agency gets, which is the exact same data set that is published on open data, but it's missing a couple of very important columns when it's public. So it's like there's the data for public to consumption, and there's the good stuff.
And what is the process of those columns not appearing? Is it?
I can't get into the specifics of that one, but yeah, it's just.
I meant at a high level.
They're protected. They're protected for one reason or the other, and
okay,
they don't end up on the open data portal, and they're the stuff that everybody wants. But it basically means that now there's two publication channels because you share it. You share it with you share something with these people over here, and you share another thing with these people over here, and it's not really the spirit of open data was that it's supposed to be you should be able to publish it once, and everybody who needs it can.
And then you have a unified
Yeah.
when you go and fix one, you're fixing the same thing for both versus.
Yeah, but I think it also just becomes, it becomes sort of a compliance thing. It was just like, okay, now we have to do this, so let's do it, and it's not quite the spirit of, what the open data law was supposed to get us to do, which is be more open about this sort of thing.
I think one of the challenges I've seen from as someone just on the outside playing is the cultural battle here, that there's this sort of, I guess, look, opening up data creates a bit of accountability, right? And one of the things I gave this example of the parking tickets with the high, and it could have been the NYPD has made a big mistake and haha, and look at them and they're silly, or it can be, hey, look, the NYPD releases data to the public. We've now fixed something and now everyone's better for it. Congratulations, NYPD, for releasing that data, right? If we can shift the narrative to one of celebration of our own, of fixing our own problems being a positive thing, which I think it is. I think if we find something wrong, we fix it. But go ahead.
In order to do that, you must say I have problems, and that's
the hardest part.
That's a very difficult.
Right, which is where sort of the external or the media or people get involved.
Sounds like we need data therapy.
I could see that.
One thing I'm looking at through these photos, we have a little screen here of showing the photos that you're seeing behind us. And, I moved to New York City because there were all these small independent storefronts, right? Like the quality of New York for me was the fact that I could have a relationship with these small business owners and go from neighborhood to neighborhood and, engage with real people. I didn't have to get stuck inside of these chain stores that were developing in my hometown in Beaver Creek, Ohio. And it's sad because I look at some of the photos of the vacant storefronts, and I see some of them have Department of Buildings permits, some of them don't. And when we talk about trying to address the problems, some of the reasons why we can't address storefront issues is the fact that data doesn't exist. And so we have city council members who are now fighting for the creation of these types of data sets. And at the same time period, if you're an advocate out there, you may be advocating for monthly or quarterly reports or yearly reports within different types of legislation. And that actually does a disservice for us as kind of like the hackers, because we're then forced to kind of where government sees the ceiling, we really want that to be the floor. And so if for those of you who are well connected in this community, and I know you are, be thinking about how you can be leveraging government reporting accountability, but not just in a standard quarterly report, but if you could, please ask for that row by row item, so that way hopefully we can ensure that New York City small businesses stay alive. I miss the Sunshine Cinema.
So there's a lot of, okay, so we talked a little about some of the nuances and the background and the politics, but let's get to the so what. So what are some of your favorite outcomes? Look, we know that there's way more data than ever before. We know there's way bigger computers. We know the world's changing, data this, data that. Where did rubber hit the road? What types of things have you seen actually change? We can all say, oh, the future's coming, but what have we seen thus far? What's some of your favorite things that you've seen where you think there's been a policy, something tangible out of all the release of this data? And please, yeah.
So I'll start with, so at NYC Planning Labs, we're basically building tools. So my way of referring to that is the last mile of open data. And I think open data, data in its raw form has a certain set of users. I think we're one of those users who actually transforms it into something that is much more useful to somebody who doesn't have either programming skills or data analysis skills. We build highly visual, highly map-centric and chart-centric applications that turn this data into useful information for real humans. Part of what has made our success possible, in addition to the different sort of tooling that we use and the fact that we're not sort of bound by procurement and budget things like every other technology project is because we use open source software, is the ubiquity of open data. And one simple example of that is that we're building a zoning application called Zola that has all of the different layers that you might need on it for understanding land use in an area. Historic districts and historic landmarks are a part of that. And we don't have to go, like you said, sign a memorandum of understanding and go sit in meetings to get access to a data set that we can put on a map for landmarks. That stuff's already public. So we just, you just grab it and you use it, and it's updated with good enough frequency. And I guess the point I'm getting to is that it decreases the the time necessary to build these impactful applications, because so many data sets that we rely on from other agencies are just out there, and we can start using them immediately. We can focus on building our apps and not on like negotiations for getting access.
Right, so in some sense, the publication of public data solves the helps with the interagency data problem, which is a big win. Any other examples that you guys like?
So I would say, New York is still like the forefront of open data policy. This morning when I checked, you have more than 2,100 data sets on the open data portal, okay? So let's say Houston, 247. So that's a big gap.
But there's quality in quantity, and we have to be careful not to because I could generate 1 million data sets for you by tomorrow if you want. It won't be very interesting, but I can make them.
But I would say lack of open data sets on open data portal through City of Houston's data portal. One issue is during the time when you have disaster like Hurricane Harvey. For us, like a research university, trying to put things together to help the government agencies, as well as we have Hurricane Harvey Relief Fund. That's people's donation to do some, to do disaster relief work. It's trying to allocate resources to the place that's hard hit communities, and you need to gather a lot of information at the same, to target those communities.
I think here in New York, when we had the listeria issue a few years ago, there's a lot of use of, this is very complicated. There was no permit for water towers, and yet we needed to go inspect all the water towers. How do you find that? And that was an example of a local disaster, as you want to call it. I mean, I wouldn't call that a disaster, but a public health issue.
Yeah, exactly. So during those times, when you need to get a lot of information, and you have open data portal that has all the information that you want, that would be great, But in our case, we need to connect with different agencies, different nonprofits to get information like the United Way 211 calls, and talk to FEMA officers, regional valve officers, to get access to certain data.
So we're losing affordable housing left and right. I'm priced out of my neighborhood in Greenpoint if I had to move. So how do we protect those that are really hanging on to their apartments? And we are so lucky and so fortunate to have forward-thinking elected officials to have created a system like 311 where you can, for those people who are in need and need to create a government record of where they're getting tenant harassment, tenant displacement, where their quality of life and their housing units are being eroded and degraded by greedy landlords, we have 311 as a backstop that can create a government record that will send agencies to their door to help document those things. And then we have other advocacy organizations, like there's this thing called DAP map, which is the displacement area map, which helps tenant organizers really identify which are the neighborhoods and which are the buildings that have affordable housing in them that are susceptible to this type of displacement. And so,
So by the way, I'm gonna take that because this is now working, which is good, and people are voting on questions. And the top one, I'm gonna throw right back at you, and then anyone can kind of jump in. But people, the top rated question is, how do you prevent negative adverse effects of open data? For example, mapping housing vacancies and predatory developers. In other words, can the same open data you're talking about protecting housing be used against you? And how do we look at that?
Yeah, I mean, but it's already been done, right? Street Easy, anyone who already had access to the information was already finding the cheap parcels of land in the apartments to buy into.
As you pointed out, years ago, the real estate already had all this information.
Yeah.
It's not like the open data portal gave it to them. They could buy it.
Yeah,
right?
so they already had access.
Now you're leveling the playing field.
Yeah, and now we're using 311 to help build those types of protections and do the tenant organizing to ensure that affordable housing, the little bit of affordable housing that we have left, is secure for the people who need it the most. Cool. Now, we also need to re-architect how our housing policy is done, so we just can't be focusing on the greedy part and protecting the little scant resources that we have left. We need new Mitchell-Lama, we need new housing.
Right.
So.
And what about privately held? Do you think we talk about open data from government? What role do corporations have a role here? Should you know, everyone says Uber should be releasing their data. Is there a standard? Do we believe that corporations should also join this open data movement? And do they have a role to play in this ecosystem? Or do you think that's sort of a totally...
Yes.
I think they totally have a role to play in this ecosystem. And I think one of the biggest barriers is, one of the biggest barriers that they cite is privacy issues and losing their business model.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to readjust the landscape and create incentives for private organizations to contribute data. And I think they're not going to do it unless there is some kind of regulatory or kind of higher incentive. I've been thinking about this more and more as I've been like writing my book about this, because I keep interviewing and they're just, well, what's my incentive? Like, what do I get out of it? You know, they do look good, or they get like a PR, but I feel like if we could actually create something around data philanthropy that's real and tangible, and that a private organization can see that they're buying into a tax credit or something, because 80% of the data in the world right now is privately owned, and if they are not contributing to use it for public good, we're missing out on lots of insights that can help our cities, our government,
And there are examples like, I don't know, one I just happen to know, MasterCard Center for
MasterCard
Innovation, I think it's called.
Yeah, and I mean,
They give data out for social good. They don't make that available to the public, but rather for researchers doing something in very specific questions, right?
Yeah, they don't actually give their data out. I interviewed them.
Fair enough, all right.
So that's one thing to actually find out. I mean, I think they do actually encourage work in this area, and they're encouraging data analysis for social inclusion. They would like to give more data out, but they don't give it out as much as they encourage more kinds of data philanthropy. So I think when I talk to them, I mean, I think they do want to give it out more, but they can't figure out the privacy issues. So I think this is a huge area that needs to be worked on.
And one interesting thing about this space is that, all right, I mean, the people who can get the most out of this, I guess, are the people who can use it, right? So we have all this data. If you're well-resourced, you're a corporation, you can do something with it. Maybe if you have a particular background or skill in education in some sort of science or math, you can do it. It gets harder and harder as you get farther away. Now there are tools that sort of empower people at all levels, but how do you know how to use them? Who's going to tell you how to use them? Are we going to create a bigger? Is it going to be the have and have-nots where we release all this data, but only the people in wealthier communities have the tooling to actually advocate for change? Do we have a, and how do we educate all of us to participate in all of this?
Mm-hmm.
So what excites me is that the tooling you describe has also become democratized in much the same way as the data has.
Cool.
And it's frankly just not that far out of reach. There is still a barrier, and you can take a Python class and you can do a data science thing. But all of these things aren't things that you need a huge financial investment to get started with.
Yeah, you have to have time to take a class.
Time also,
and maybe you're working.
But that's been very empowering also. Is that sort of the other side of the consumption end of the data experience has also sort of been democratized, and anyone who if you have the itch to scratch and a little bit of time on your hands, the open source software is there to allow you to start poking and asking questions at this stuff in a matter of hours or days.
And I know I'm a computer nerd, so it's not exactly the same. But someone asked about GIS software. Typically that's ArcGIS, which is this very expensive software. But there's this thing called QGIS, which is a free version that you can download, and it has a lot of the same functionality. I've never actually used ArcGIS. I've never seen it actually. I've only ever used this open source software, and I'm someone coming in from not with a planning background, know nothing about the software, and kind of played enough to be able to answer basic questions because of this open source movement that's kind of democratized our tools, which is awesome.
Yeah, I'm teaching a class right now on it's data analysis and visualization for planners, and it's strictly open source and cloud tooling.
Great.
Because we don't want to get into that realm where the only people who can access this stuff are those who can pay the software.
Can buy the software.
Pay the software licenses.
Other thoughts on educating?
I think data literacy is really hugely important, and I think it needs to start at the high school level. I think if we're becoming more of a data-driven society, we need to be able to critique, read data, not even necessarily be able to do the analysis, but critique the maps and charts that we see that are being presented to us as policy.
Know what questions to ask.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Don't just trust the little,
this
bar is bigger than this bar.
Or just like
it
debate.
should be curriculum in high school, right?
It's like, this always comes back. I think there's always this like notion that you can't, like it's just rude to like argue with someone if they make bad arguments with data, right? It's like the instant response should be
right.
you know constructive criticism. You don't want to call them an idiot, but like let's have some discourse. Like you made this map, and if you were open about your methodology and
right.
how you actually prep the data for it, it should speak for itself. And if you aren't, then like yeah, we can pick it to pieces.
I dream of like a show your work mentality in government. Like imagine if every time someone passed a policy, and like oh well we're having this problem in our neighborhood, we need to do this. Imagine if they had to show their work.
Yeah.
Like and you could check their work. I mean that would be amazing. We have to do it in school. Why can't our government officials show their work?
So I work for Kinder Institute for Urban Research. It's a think tank at Rice University. We sometimes call ourselves Think and Do Tank. We really focus on the do part. So through the Houston Community Data Connections, that's a program that I oversee. I work with a lot of nonprofits actually to help them to understand how to practically use data, how to interpret data, and also help capacity building. So through the program, we not only provide a neighborhood level information, we also help them to teach them to create a data visualization tool and also to understand, interpret data charts through charts, maps, to tell a story about their community. So that would help them to talk to the community members and help them to understand that. So this year, our focus is more on our training part. So providing all kinds of training, like data literacy, like a data 101. You don't need a computer to understand data. Like just through some tables, how to how to collect data from the neighborhood, and what kind of information you want to collect, why you collect those information, what your program, social service program is about, those kind of basic questions. And then moving to the data management side, how to compile all data. And then to the next level, like a data analysis, which nonprofit staff, sometimes they don't have the training background in data analytics. So that's the part that, because we're a university, we have some material to share with them.
And I know Noel even has this beautiful deck of cards that is used to teach data, right?
Yeah, well,
it's awesome.
So we were invited by the Mayor's Office of Tech and Innovation to go out to Brownsville and teach a group of individuals who didn't have a very high technical literacy about data. And we also didn't have internet, and there wasn't going to be a projector, and nobody would have computers. And so how do you teach someone in that environment
just that.
About the value of data or the opportunity that you could see within 311 data? So we came up with a card game, which is now part of our 101. We also have like some very interactive portions. And if you go to beta.nyc/classes, you can see all of the teaching materials. And so we start off with a card game, then we teach you some things about data journeys, and so that's some visualization based upon 311 data. And then we work you into the Socrata. We work you into spreadsheets, then we work you into census data and other GIS software. And so that's one element that we're targeting toward adults. And now we're taking that exact same curriculum and actually working with the Department of Education CS for All program to tailor that same education to middle school and high school students as for the city's STEAM education. And so over the next year, the CS for All program is going to have a series of hackathons that's going to be based on open data, where we're going to be teaching kids how to become advocates for issues in their community, so that way they can essentially apply to be on a community board, and their voices are then also heard. And if not, we've at least taught them how to become better advocates based upon the information that's out there in the ecosystem, and hopefully they can be, stewards of the public space as well.
Great, and I want to squeeze in two more. We don't have much time. One really quick, just short answers. People are wondering if they're interested, they want to get involved. You've convinced them. What type of organization should they be looking for? How do they jump into this ecosystem?
If you're into maps and visualizations, GeoNYC hosts a monthly group of meetups. So GeoNYC, another one called Gizmo, GISMO, which
are these all on like meetups.com? Is that where you
these
find
are.
them?
If you just use the Google or the Yahoo, or the Bing. You will get to NYC, which is a meetup, which has monthly meetups. Gizmo has a monthly meetup. What's the NYS forum, New York State Forum?
New York State Forum.
If you're in
Anyway,
government.
the answer is meetups.
And then BetaNYC, we take volunteers and we have an annual conference.
And we're going to end, once again, limited time, but in a sentence or two from each of you, what do you want in the future of open data? Like if the world could look a certain way in 5 years in open data, what one thing would you be most excited by? Just that, really briefly.
Collaborative data maintenance, data publishing and data sharing is all very much a one-way street where somebody maintains and then just gives it to somebody else to use. And we do not have the feedback loop. We do not have the actual collaborative spirit that exists.
So more two-way dialogue.
Not even two-way, just always open. Think of it as an open source project. Whoever is interested in the preservation and
you're over your 2 sentences
of that data set should be able to participate.
All right, cool.
I'm really interested in regulations that help private companies open up their data sets.
Awesome.
I want to see elected officials and community boards have a better understanding of the environment that they're in.
So I'll quote Charles Dickens, it was the best of the time and it was the worst of the time. So we have a lot of data. Now we need to understand how to use that data and to achieve our goals.
Awesome. Thank you. All, let's have a round of applause for our panelists. This has been great.